There is a dangerous moment in the life of every declining empire when it mistakes desperation for strategy, when it confuses the ability to take something with the wisdom of taking it, when it sees a piece of land, calculates its resources, and assumes that proximity to power is the same as the right to possess it. America has just entered that moment. On January 6, 2026, President Trump stood in the Oval Office and announced that the United States would acquire Greenland. Not purchase, not negotiate, acquire. He did not say how. He did not say when. He simply declared it a strategic necessity and moved forward as though the matter was already settled. The Danish government, which maintains sovereignty over Greenland, immediately called it a violation of international law. Greenland's own government, led by Premier Mute Borup Egede, issued a statement that was almost quaint in its clarity. Greenland is not for sale. We are not for sale. Our resources are not for sale. Our sovereignty cannot be purchased with money. But listen to what Trump said in response. He suggested that Denmark might not want to keep paying to defend Greenland. He implied that American military protection is a commodity that can be exchanged. He made clear that refusal to sell was merely a negotiating position, not a final answer. Within hours, intelligence analysts began mapping the implications. Strategic planners started calculating what Greenland actually represents in a world of climate change, resource scarcity, and great power competition. And in Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen, Chinese strategists smiled, because what Trump has revealed through his naked appetite for Greenland is something China has known and exploited for 2 decades. The Arctic is not a frozen frontier. It is the prize of the 21st century, and Greenland is the lock that secures it. To understand why Greenland matters more than any American president has publicly admitted, you have to first understand what is actually there. On the surface, Greenland is a massive island of ice and rock, 2.2 million square kilometers in size, sitting at the top of the world with a population of just 57,000 people spread across a coast that has never known winter in the way that Iceland or Alaska experiences it. The interior is a vast ice sheet covering 80% of the island's landmass, holding enough fresh water to raise global sea levels by 7 meters if it melted completely. But the ice is not what made Trump's eyes light up. It is what lies beneath it. As the Arctic warms, and it is warming at a rate 3 times faster than the rest of the planet, Greenland's geological secrets are being exposed. Beneath the ice and rock lies one of the most significant rare earth element deposits on Earth. According to the United States Geological Survey, Greenland contains an estimated 6.4 million metric tons of rare earth oxides. That is roughly 11% of the world's known rare earth reserves. The specific concentrations are staggering: dysprosium, terbium, erbium, elements so rare that global supply is measured in thousands of tons per year, yet so essential that modern industrial civilization quite literally cannot function without them. A single smartphone contains dozens of rare earth elements. Electric vehicle motors require them. Wind turbine generators cannot operate without them. Advanced military systems, guidance systems, targeting computers, radar arrays are utterly dependent on rare earth supply chains. For 60 years, China understood something that Washington slept on. China began acquiring rare earth mining assets across the globe. China invested in processing technology. China built the refining infrastructure that transforms raw ore into usable material. Today, China controls approximately 70% of global rare earth processing capacity, not mining, processing. That distinction is critical. You can mine rare earth elements in a dozen countries, but if you cannot process them, you cannot use them. And China has made itself the indispensable refiner for every nation on Earth. When the Trump administration imposed tariffs on Chinese goods, when Washington implemented export restrictions on advanced technology, what did Beijing do? They announced restrictions on rare earth exports. They did not cut supplies. They simply reminded Washington that the relationship was far more asymmetrical than American planners had assumed. Now Trump looks at Greenland and sees the possibility of breaking that asymmetry. The Kvanefjeld project, approved by Greenland's parliament in 2021, is being developed by the Australian mining company Greenland Minerals. It is projected to produce approximately 40,000 tons of rare earth oxides per year once fully operational. The timeline is ambitious. Initial production could begin as early as 2028. Full production capacity could be reached by 2032. If it reaches those targets, Kvanefjeld alone would account for roughly 5% of global rare earth supply. When combined with other deposits being explored across Greenland, the theoretical capacity could eventually reach 15 to 20% of global output. To a supply chain strategist, this looks like a pathway to independence. To a geopolitical analyst, it looks like something far more dangerous. It looks like American desperation. Because controlling rare earth supply does not automatically solve the problem. You must build processing infrastructure. You must develop the technological expertise. You must construct the supply chains. You must do all of this while managing the geopolitical fallout of essentially seizing territory that belongs to another nation. And while America builds, China will not be idle. That is where the hidden game becomes apparent. Greenland's current government is not simply defending sovereignty out of principle. They are playing a much more sophisticated game. In 2019, before the Kvanefjeld mine was even approved, a Chinese consortium called Shenghe Resources purchased the rights to process rare earth elements at a facility in the city of Sisimiut in western Greenland. The Chinese company became Greenland's primary processor of rare earth ore. They established expertise. They built relationships. They made themselves invaluable to Greenland's economic future. When Trump threatens acquisition, Shenghe Resources does not disappear. The infrastructure remains, the relationships persist, the contracts continue, and if the United States seizes Greenland by force or coercion, it inherits Chinese mining agreements and processing contracts that are already in place. In late 2024, Greenland's government signed a new agreement with Chinese interests to increase investment in Greenland's critical mineral sector. The timing was not accidental. Beijing watched Washington's appetite for territorial expansion and positioned itself perfectly. Now consider the Arctic itself. For centuries, the Arctic was simply cold. With global warming, it is becoming accessible. Shipping routes that required icebreakers and months of navigation can now be traversed in days. The Northwest Passage through Canadian waters is opening. The Northeast Passage along the Russian coast is becoming navigable for much of the year. These routes cut shipping time from Asia to Europe by 40% compared to traditional routes through the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal carries roughly 12% of global trade. The Arctic routes will eventually carry far more. Whoever controls Greenland controls the gateway to these passages. Whoever controls Greenland also controls vast areas of continental shelf in the Arctic Ocean, where new oil and natural gas deposits are being discovered as the ice recedes. The geological surveys completed over the past 5 years estimate that the Arctic contains roughly 13% of the world's undiscovered oil reserves and 30% of its natural gas. That is approximately 90 billion barrels of oil equivalent waiting beneath the Arctic seabed. But here is the detail that should terrify Washington. Much of that continental shelf legally belongs to countries other than the United States. International law, as codified in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, grants coastal nations exclusive economic zones extending 200 nautical miles from their shores. Greenland, as part of Denmark, is a signatory to this convention. So are Russia, Canada, Norway, and all the other Arctic nations except the United States. America has never ratified the Law of the Sea Convention. It signed the document in 1994, but never sent it to the Senate for ratification. Therefore, the United States has no legal standing to claim Arctic continental shelf rights. It cannot expand its exclusive economic zone. It cannot legally drill for Arctic oil or gas beyond its Alaska territorial waters. And it cannot prevent Russia, Canada, or other nations from exploiting their own continental shelf resources. Greenland gives America a solution to this problem. If the United States controls Greenland, it can claim the vast continental shelf zones that extend from Greenland's coast. It can begin exploration and extraction of Arctic oil and gas reserves that would otherwise remain inaccessible. It can establish a northern naval presence that would allow American warships to operate in Arctic waters without relying on Canadian cooperation or requesting passage through Danish straits. In effect, Greenland is the key that unlocks America's Arctic strategy, and Trump wants it now. The consequences of this strategy are already unfolding. Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has made clear that Greenland's sovereignty is non-negotiable. Greenland is not for sale, she stated on January 7th. It never has been. It never will be. But more significantly, she has been consulting with other NATO members about Trump's statements. France has issued a formal protest. Germany has expressed concern. The European Union released a statement defending the integrity of international law and the principle of territorial sovereignty. The global South, watching this unfold, is drawing obvious conclusions. If the United States can threaten to seize Greenland, what prevents it from seizing mineral-rich territories in Africa? What prevents it from taking control of oil fields in the Middle East? What prevents it from annexing strategic territories in Southeast Asia? The answer, increasingly, is nothing but the will to resist. And resistance is only possible when alternative power structures exist, which brings us to China's positioning. While Trump openly announces his territorial ambitions, China operates with patient sophistication. Beijing has been establishing itself in the Arctic for more than a decade. Chinese research stations operate in Greenland, Iceland, Norway, and Russia. Chinese scientists participate in Arctic research initiatives. Chinese investment flows into Greenlandic infrastructure projects. In 2022, China officially designated itself a near-Arctic state, despite being thousands of kilometers from the Arctic Circle. This is not geographic nonsense. This is strategic positioning. The Belt and Road Initiative now includes what Beijing calls the Polar Silk Road. Chinese investments in Arctic ports, Arctic infrastructure, and Arctic resources are being made with the understanding that Arctic trade will become increasingly vital as sea ice disappears. When Trump threatens Greenland, Beijing does not need to respond militarily. Beijing simply needs to ensure that Greenland, if it remains independent, or if it somehow comes under Chinese sphere of influence, participates in Chinese trade networks. Chinese processing capacity already handles much of Greenland's mineral exports. Chinese capital is already flowing into Greenlandic projects. And as the United States demonstrates that American security guarantees come with the price of territorial concessions, Greenland and other nations will increasingly look toward partnerships that do not require surrendering sovereignty. The NATO alliance faces an existential question. If Trump is willing to threaten and possibly seize the territory of Denmark, a founding member of NATO, what does NATO's collective defense commitment actually mean? Article 5 of the NATO treaty promises that an attack on one member is an attack on all. But what about coercion? What about economic pressure? What about a president simply declaring that he intends to acquire allied territory? Denmark is not under military attack, but it is under pressure, and NATO's response will reveal whether the alliance still has meaning. Already, there are whispers that Denmark might seek security partnerships beyond NATO, that it might, over time, look toward European institutions that operate independent of American military dominance, that it might, paradoxically, be pushed closer to European integration precisely because American alliance credibility is collapsing. The irony is exquisite. Trump sought to secure Greenland in order to enhance American strategic position in the Arctic. The result will be to fracture the alliance structure that gave America its strategic position in the first place. But the deepest irony lies in the economic calculation. The Arctic resources Trump covets are worthless without the global trade system that makes them valuable. American companies need access to Asian markets to sell the products those rare earth elements create. American consumers depend on the supply chains that reach from Asia to America across the Arctic passages Trump wants to control. If the pursuit of Greenland fractures NATO, if it pushes Europe toward alternative security architectures, if it accelerates the decoupling of allied economies from American dominance, then Trump will have purchased Arctic resources at the cost of the geopolitical system that made those resources economically valuable. China does not need to defend Greenland. It does not need to deploy military forces to the Arctic. It simply needs to watch as Washington shatters its own coalition structure in pursuit of resources that China already has secure supply chains to access. By 2030, the world will have split into competing economic and strategic blocs. The dollar-denominated system will have weakened further. Resource-rich nations will have developed alternative trade mechanisms that do not depend on American approval. Arctic shipping routes will be operating at full capacity, controlled by whoever holds the relevant territories and straits. And Greenland, whether it remains independent, falls under Chinese influence, or somehow becomes American, will be far less valuable than Trump imagines because the system that made it strategically crucial will have already fragmented. The greatest strategic blunder is often the one that looks like the boldest move, and America's naked reach for Greenland may prove to be exactly that, a moment when desperation was mistaken for strength, when the ability to take something obscured the wisdom of letting it remain, when Washington, in securing a piece of the Arctic, lost its grip on everything else,